I found the money workshop very helpful. I was apprehensive in attending because I'm not very good at maths.
I found the workshop extremely interesting, and more interesting because the plans for a toolkit were a lot of the issues in the way in which I'd planned my budget.
I came there as a kind of, how can I put it, an economic virgin, not knowing quite what to expect. But the most fascinating thing for me was the participation of other people from elsewhere. One of the great things about community groups of older people is that coming together and sharing experience and the dialectic.
We were a mixture, and we all had something to contribute. There was nobody who sat quietly and felt they had nothing to say.
It was a positive experience from all perspectives, actually, not just from my own learning curve, but also from sharing the experience with other like-minded people, all of whom I thought were affirmative, and even though they weren't all as sceptical as myself about the process, nonetheless, they put energy and effort into it, and I think it resulted in added value at the end of the day.
It was inspiring, really. I came out feeling much better than I went in.
I'm very, very keen on peer-to-peer support. If I may bring in my hip operation next week, I'm going to stay with an 86-year-old lady who's going to look after me for a week residentially. She's had 2 hips replaced, so the house is fit for purpose, and it's an older person caring for another older person, and I think that's marvellous.
The workshops were a really interesting experience for me, because having retired and had a job that was a very social job, retirement can be quite isolating. So to come together with like-minded people who were generally experiencing some of the things you were experiencing, I felt was really helpful.
It was a very positive experience. It was a good bonding experience. I shared experiences with people.
A one-to-one is very, very helpful. Because you can talk through things, and it's often by talking through things yourself and how you think they might be done, and it encourages the other person to come out with what they think might suit them in the way to do things.
Sometimes it was a learning curve because you think, oh golly, I didn't think of that. Possibly I could have done that, or oh golly, I mustn't do that. Don't want to go down that road. I found the booklet good. Because I hadn't done anything like that before. I'd muddled through, and it set it out nicely.
What I found was that there were things within it that I thought were really useful to certain older people at certain times of their life or certain life events that they had.
I used the booklet in advance because I'd just done a report for my financial advisor, so I had what I thought was quite a definitive collection of facts and numbers.
The detail is what I think is invaluable about the leaflet, because that leaves most obvious things covered by it.
I was fascinated to see that what my financial advisor wanted and what the booklet wanted was very different.
I'd never seen anything like the toolkit before, but I had started my working life in a bank, so I wasn't a stranger to numbers and pounds.
The actual process of running through the leaflet, I found less daunting than I had thought.
Found filling it out very easy and again very interesting. A lot of the items that were listed that you needed to review your spending were the ones I'd taken account of when I worked my budget out, and there were 1 or 2 new ones I thought, yes, that's worth looking at again.
I really liked the booklet. Yes, I thought that was very helpful, and actually I've been using it since. Yeah, so I was impressed.
Writing things down on the planner, I think, was a useful thing to do, because in retirement, on what is a much reduced income, possibly by 50%, you need to be so much more careful with your money to live within the pension, the monthly pension that you're given. So to write it all down and begin to see all those things that go out of your bank account as the normal monthly payments for fuel, for council tax, was a very salutary experience. and it made you realise what a significant proportion of your pension will disappear before you can begin to see what disposable income you've got each month.
It's definitely a good way to write things down. And personally, it's also very helpful if you have a friend who's quicker than I am at doing the maths of things.
When I use my own budgeting tool, although I do it online, I always print out a paper copy because I'm sweetly old-fashioned in that way. And I find it much easier to go through papers to find something I'm looking for than I do to go through a computer and try and track it down. And that's in spite of all the little smart bits that the software has nowadays.
I like paper. I mean, the computer is okay, but you have to keep moving the pages, don't you? The screen. Whereas if you've got it in a booklet, you can open it up and it's there.
Having written it down, it brings it into sharp focus what the cost of living actually is. Goal setting in the booklet was a little bit of a trial because you don't normally sit down and do that, or if you do, it's often a mental process rather than a physical process of writing it down. And it did make you think of the incremental steps you would need to take to achieve that goal.
It was good in the workshop to think about what we'd like to do and how we could achieve it.
In the toolkit, there was a section on goals and actions, and there were one or two things in there that I hadn't thought of, and I have since put them into practice.
The booklet you produced, I think, would be incredibly helpful to people approaching retirement. That's where I feel it would be most useful. It's still useful once you've retired to bring it into that sharp focus, but at that point you can do very little about it. You've cooked your goose and you're on your pension, but it would be a very useful preparation if anyone needed it in planning for retirement.
It would be very helpful at the front of it to say who this might be useful for.
Where the booklet could be most useful, I think, is twofold. One, it is particularly where an advisor is called in somewhere or other. I'm thinking of my own Age UK in Wandsworth, where we have an advice service. And when a pensioner comes in pressed because they have bills that they can't afford or commitments that are finding difficult, or their income is not adequate for them to manage on, then to be able to sit down with them with that and to have a guided tour, if you like, over all the key elements of what might be your income and might be your expenditure, that would be invaluable. It could also be useful for people who freshly encounter an experience, whether it's leaving work and retiring, whether it could even be something like, having their housing taken away from them for one reason or another, losing their partner, having a dramatic change in health, or some other life event which was unexpected, because it would help people to take stock. What I thought was particularly useful was in the booklet where it laid out the details of both income and expenditure, because when somebody faces one of life's crises that is unexpected or unlooked for, then it's very useful to be able to sit down and say, look, I've got X, Y, and Z as my income, and I've got to pay this much out each month, and I need to put this much aside to pay for this lump sum bill. So it gives you a scale of whether you've got what I would call headroom.